Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the stream. This evening, we are doing the first of what I plan to be many world building streams. So, I have a number of worlds that I eventually want to flesh out. Some I will do on stream, some not. I suppose I ought to start by talking through them, I suppose. So there are 4 worlds that are my own, and then there's one world that I'm building in conjunction with my friend Essa. So let's start with that. Southern Reaches is a D&D world that I'm doing in conjunction with Essa. It is a West Marches style campaign. So Essa and I have been fleshing out the world there. I am probably not going to do that on stream. There may be 1 or 2 things that I might do, but for the most part, the background, the campaign is there to be explored by the players, so I don't want to spoil anything. So that's the first world. The 4 worlds of my own, in no particular order. I have a sci-fi world set in the far future that is the setting for a novel that I've been working on since about 2006. Well, I've been working on the novel itself since 2006. The world itself is a lot older. The world is quite well established, as you might imagine, given how long I've been working on it. So I probably won't work on much of that on stream, but it's there, it exists. Maybe someday I'll do an overview of that world and allow people to understand the setting. I have a couple of other small settings that I've not really done much with. They're the basis behind some short story ideas. So one is set in a sort of feudal land. I haven't determined whether it's more sort of Japanese or more European. It's probably a mixture of 2. And there's a story that I've set in that. It's inspired by a number of different things. And the story is told through the medium of letters. And that's all you get. So it's probably one person's perspective, and he's writing letters to other people. I haven't decided yet whether I'd also include letters that come from other people, but it would be predominantly one perspective. And that was a sort of story idea that I'd like to explore. It's possible that setting we may explore at some point on stream. Not yet, but when I'm ready to work on it. That is not a priority. There's also a sort of spy master setting, so more sort of modern day. Hello, Essa. Yes. Start the stream with all the explanation when nobody's watching. So the spy master setting that I have, present day, it's heavily inspired by the works of John le Carrier, and that's something that I'll work on at a future time. Again, we may explore that on stream, but we'll see. Now, what I'm going to work on today is my D&D world. So I have a character called Archimedes, who is a sword mage, and anybody who knows me will know that I've been working on this for years. I have a number of short stories that I've written for Archimedes, a couple of which have been published as part of small anthologies on sort of D&D character stories. And that's where I started working on them. And from that, I've built some groundwork for a world, but I want to flesh that out. So that's what we're going to work on today. And I thought that what I would do is I would start from the very beginning and go, right, I know I have some ideas of things that exist in the world at the present day for the stories that I've written for Archimedes. There are some aspects that exist that will link in, but let's start from the beginning and go, right, what are the main overall guiding principles of this setting, this universe? How did it begin? So I've already written some notes. They're thoroughly disjointed and probably aren't readable. So this is going to be entertaining, trying to get this in a more readable format. Let's move that in there. And zoom that in. Right, how's that, Essa? Can you read that? What I also ought to do is just take these off. Because I'm not talking to anybody, so I don't need any headphones. So let's tuck those in there. Oh, not there. There we go. Right. So let's start with this universe. Let's go, right. In the beginning, there is nothing. Yes, lots of beard. I am growing a new beard. This one will be my new sort of Santa stroke Viking beard. So, and those of you who remember the length it was before, imagine that, but full face. We'll see how that goes. Right. Yes, indeed. So, these were just some notes that I started off with. I don't know why I thought of working out whether or not there was a moon first and how many. That's one of the least important aspects of the setting. So let's start with some of my broad ideas. So in the present day, Therinthop. Yes, the moon is important, but it's not more important than universe cosmology stuff as yet. So in the present day, there is a thing, a concept that I came up with that I hadn't really fleshed out in any great detail, called Tempest Keep. Archimedes, one of his titles is Guardian of the Eternal Fires of Tempest Keep, which was just something that I made up because it sounded cool. But there is more underlying aspects. So one of the things that relates to this keep and the guardians of this keep is that each guardian represents an element or looks after an element. So we have, as you'd expect, fire, water, air, earth. Archimedes becomes the fire guardian. One of the elves of the High Councils, one of the elves of the Elven High Council from the forest from which Archimedes grew up, is the water guardian. There are two others that I haven't covered yet. So those elements are quite important in this world. And I think that the Guardians probably have some link to where the elemental planes intersect with the material planes, and therefore there are key points that relate to those. It's all a bit wishy at the moment. But in terms of how I think we get there, we start with, I like the term primordial soup. It's a good term. So basically a cosmological stuff. And my thinking is that out of that comes the elemental planes. The material plane sort of comes later. As the elemental planes sort of coalesce and define themselves, and out of that chaos comes the material plane. That's the broad sequence of things. Also thinking in terms of sort of later on, once we get species, I've imagined there being sort of three broad sequences of species. So you start with some kind of elder species, and I'm imagining that they are sort of celestial based, and they may eventually become they may eventually sort of ascend and become the gods of the material plane. I should actually write this down, shouldn't I? So, elder species, sort of celestial based, eventually become the gods of the material plane. Question mark. And then after this elder species you have the elves, and that's your sort of second sequence. So the elves, and these were probably originally servants to the elder species. I'm aware that this is very Tolkien-esque. Because Tolkien, if you've ever read the Silmarillion, I can't, in all honesty, actually recommend it, because it's not. It's interesting, but it's not entertaining. But if you're interested in the roots, the very roots of Tolkien lore, Middle Earth lore, Silmarillion's worth reading. He starts off with a very sort of creationist idea of having an over-god and sort of an angel type servants, lesser gods, that sort of thing. And then there's the elves that originally existed in this heaven place, and they were then expelled to Middle Earth. And, well, not expelled as such, they were sent to Middle Earth, and their role was to help prepare the world for the coming of man. So, I like that sort of idea. Not necessarily in the same context. But so I like the idea of, we start off with this elder species within the material plane, or within the cosmos. They have elven servants, and the elder species perhaps eventually becomes the gods of the plane, or have some kind of sort of special first species existence. Are you struggling, Essa? So then we have the elves that are the servants to these, and they are sort of the first sort of humanoid species on the material plane, and then later comes the humans and the other species. So the third generation of species, so the humans, the dwarves, etc., they all see the elves as the elder species and not necessarily be aware of what came before. So these are ones. Yeah, I get that. Tolkien very much wasn't. I'm not going to get into that on this stream, but he very much wasn't. He's been interpreted that way, but that is more people projecting their own thoughts onto what he presents and assuming that it is prejudice. That's not the original intention. Not the peak of development. So, in the Tolkien world, bear in mind that Middle-earth is Middle-earth was originally designed as an Anglo-Saxon mythology. So a lot of continental Europe retains its ancient mythology. In the UK, a lot of that disappeared due to things like the Norman conquest. So a lot of the original mythology that our original settlers, natives had, ceased to exist. So when Tolkien was researching this, he ended up sort of developing his own. So ultimately, Middle-earth was a world that was built for humans. The other races, there aren't actually that many other races or species within the Tolkien universe. So I mean, you have sort of. Can you think of 2.5? Oh, you can think of 2.5. So you got humans, elves, orcs, dwarves, halflings, which are sort of humanoids. So the Overgod created Middle-earth as a home for humans. The heaven area, which has its name, begins with V, can't remember. It's not Valhalla, but it's something like that. The heaven area is the world Valinor. Thank you. That's the area for the sort of lesser gods and the elves. So Middle-earth was never supposed to be the home for the elves. They were the temporary caretakers of it until the humans arrived, at which point the elves would leave and go back to Valinor. That was their home. You have the Numenor, which is the line of ancient kings that Aragorn came from. They're not their own species. They are simply humans that are bred with elves and therefore have extra long life. The dwarves were created as a species by one of the sort of lesser gods, the sort of angel type creatures. No, the Numenor were not the southern people. I think they're literally, the southern people were literally just called Corsairs. Or do you not mean that? Do you mean the people of Gondor? I don't know. No more south. Well, they were still human. So they were still human. And bear in mind that Tolkien doesn't really expand on the world outside of that Middle-earth area. Or if he does, I haven't read it. And there's an awful lot that I haven't read. The dwarves are their own special case. So they were created by one of these angelic beings. Because this particular angelic being wanted to create their own species. And it was counter to the will of this overgod. So the dwarves were I suppose they're a lesser species, if you like, kind of. I don't know. They weren't supposed to be there, but they became. And then you've got orcs that were made as a result of magical experiments on elves. And you've got other sort of grotesque, evil things that were created as a result of magic. Halflings, they're just small humanoids. There's no explanation as to where they came from. But I'm assuming that they are more associated with humans in some way in the mythology. At that point, we're starting to get to the limits of my understanding of Tolkien mythology. But yes, essentially, because it's designed as a sort of modern human mythology, if you like, mythological equivalent. The world is basically for humans, and it's an explanation of how we get to that point. So there are a lot of parallels that came in with that relate to sort of ancient Norse mythology and that sort of stuff. Which you wouldn't necessarily get on the first glance, but for instance, Gandalf is an equivalent to a character in Anglo-Saxon mythology known as Woden, equivalent to Odin in Norse mythology. And that's who Gandalf is. Well, that's where he came from. So there are lots of sort of little links in there, but ultimately it became its own thing. That was a detour. So yes, I like the idea of the world starting out as you have this elder species, probably sort of celestial-ish, that existed around, may eventually become the gods of the material plane. Then you've got the elves that come in and they become the elder humanoid species. And they're probably originally developed as servants to this elder species and then sort of were left to their own devices. And then later on, then you have the third stage is humans and the rest. I'm not necessarily going to develop specific origin stories for all types of creatures in this world. Yes, this is going to be a D&D setting. If it were not, I would limit it to much fewer species. Probably just the classic humans, halflings, dwarves, elves, thereabouts. But it's a D&D setting, so I've got to account for everybody. So a lot of it will just be, well, they came in at the same time. In terms of magical capabilities, yeah. D&D has the problem that in order to sort of cater for everything, it's almost got too much in it. And it's like a lot of the monsters, for instance, in classic mythology, those monsters are all the same things, just known by different names. And in D&D, they split them out into different monsters, different capabilities. And they're also then become fixed at certain challenge ratings and certain levels. So rather than having sort of certain types of undead that scale from the bottom to the top, you end up going, well, in the bottom levels you have these types of undead, then you have these types of undead, then you have these types of undead, then those types of undead, and then those types of undead, and then you have liches and all-powerful building and beings at the top, right? And for me personally, I'd just rather say, okay, you've got this category of undead, or fewer categories of undead, and you can have skeletons that are level 1, and you can have skeletons that are that challenge level 1, and you can have skeletons that challenge level 30, for instance. I'd much rather that sort of system. But, you know, I'm not creating a game system. I'm just working with it. They did kind of do that with the additional content. And actually, if I were to run a campaign, that is how I would do it. I would... I would specifically decide okay, I want these types of creatures, and then homebrew them at the level that I need them. So yeah. Right, then we get magic. You can't make a CR-15 goblin except if they are a mighty spellcaster or something. See, I don't agree with that. I didn't see any reason why you shouldn't have a CR-15 goblin who's just a really capable fighter. The problem is that everything in D&D is skewed towards magic. And once you get to higher levels, magic basically rules all. There's a saying that was used to describe power levels in traditional D&D, which went linear fighters, quadratic wizards. So the fighters would scale linearly. Great word to say fast. Linearly. Yeah, there you go. So they have the base ability at the start, and at the end, their ability is that base ability times 4. Lily, yes. Whereas wizards, they start really, really weak, and then by the end, they are basically gods. And you get that sort of... I'm trying to do it on camera. Exponential curve. And so basically when you get to that high level, everything is really skewed towards those spellcasters. 4th edition changed that. It made everybody equally powerful at the top end. And that was something that I really liked. But a lot of people didn't, and that's why it changed back. Although, that's why your fighter makes 3 attacks with 3d12 plus 6 damage. Yes, but at what level? $13. Yeah. Now, say a level 20 fighter can make 4 attacks, possibly 5, in one round. And they're all dependent on the level of the weapon used and what have you. But the wizard will be able to cast something that does, in an area of a radius of 30 foot, 12d10 damage or something stupid. I'll have to look up the table in the DMG to see what 9th level spells are supposed to do. Yeah, exactly. So that's how they balance it. And I mean, bear in mind that 5th edition is a lot more balanced from that perspective than any other edition. Although also bear in mind in 5th edition, all spellcasters not all spellcasters, the full spellcasters have access to cantrips, which scale with level. So they're still effective even once they run out of slots. Which didn't used to be the case. In 1st and 2nd edition, and I think even 3rd edition, when wizards ran out of spell slots, they were useless. Absolutely useless. They could hit something on the head with a quarterstaff once per round. That was it. And usually, because strength was their dump stat, not very effectively either. Yeah, exactly. I should have known that this was going to go down a rabbit hole. Yeah, I played some 3.5 computer games as well. I also had the books. I never actually played a live D&D game of 3.5 because I used to have no friends. But I also, if you play the original Baldur's Gate games, those are based on 2nd edition, which is very strange. Yeah, I made a lot of character sheets. I did some world building at that time, so. So, where does my magic come from? So, do I want to play a D&D? No. I can imagine that would be an exercise in frustration. Oh, the adventure. It depends on the adventure. I know that Matt Colville had very good things to say about Red-Handed Doom, which I think is a 3rd edition adventure. You can't get the other two? What, even on DM's Guild? Because they've basically released more or less... Oh yeah, I need to disable that for world building streams. Anyway. From what I understand, on DM's Guild, they've released most of the back catalogue for the previous editions. And that was one thing that they promised to do when they launched 5th edition. Because one of the things that they realised, so when they started 4th edition, they basically kicked everything else out. They said, right, this is the edition we're working on. This is all we're going to support. And that was one of the many things that pissed people off. And when they got to 5th edition, they said, okay, fair enough, we made a mistake. We are going to support the entire back catalogue. Well, not support as such, but they were going to make accessible that back catalogue on DM's Guild, because they realised that actually a lot of people were still playing 1st edition, a lot of people were still playing 2nd edition, a lot of people were still playing 3rd edition, and wanted to continue to do so. So yeah, it's also a money-making exercise for them. Because basically by having digital copies of everything and selling them for a certain amount of money, they make a lot of money. So yeah, it's actually good, makes good business sense, to be fair. just like their idea of, just like their idea of going, right, we'll sell you the book. You then have to pay for the book again on D&D Beyond, and again in Roll20. Yes. Right. So magic. So one of the ideas I have for magic is you've got these 3 stages of species development. I was going to say humanity, but that doesn't make sense in a multi-species world. Anyway, so we've got these sort of three stages, and you got the first stage, this elder species, which I consider to be basically inherently magical. Can I spell? Thank you. They are more or less beings of magic. Kind of. The elves are very good with magic. But less so than the elders. So the elves aren't inherently beings of magic, but they have an inherent connection with that magicalness. And then there you go. Humans are humans et al. I'm just going to go with that. Not magical, but can learn magic. So essentially, as you go through each of those stages, each stage becomes less magical than the previous one. How do I balance this in a D&D context? I don't know. I might have some NPC stuff that elves can do. In 2nd edition, I think, there was a concept of elven high magic, which I may steal some ideas from. I don't know. You want to tell me what this campaign is, Essa? What is it called? Difficult to say. What's the adventure called? I can go and look it up afterwards. Sword of the Dales. Is it a Forgotten Realms adventure? That sounds like a Forgotten Realms adventure. I'm tempted to look it up now, but I'm not going to do it on stream. I don't think that would be entertaining content. For level 1 to 4. Yeah, bear in mind that if it's second level, it took a very long time to level up. Second level, second edition. It took a very long time to level up. Bear in mind that most campaigns at that time, you were lucky if you got to 7th level. They don't progress anywhere near as fast as modern D&D does. Also, the early editions expected you to die. A lot. Law, not so much. Right, so we've discussed roughly how the planes come about. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. We discussed the 3 stages of species, magic, the next thing I put down was to start thinking about what... Hey Mike, thanks for the look. I know you're streaming, so you're probably not hearing me. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to do was think about what sort of a planetary system were we getting on the material plane. So we could have a setting whereby it actually has the capability of eventually becoming a modern universe. And therefore you have a solar system, other planets, other solar systems, galaxy, etc. But the setting in the D&D concepts just sees it in the way that our medieval counterparts did. And it's just a single world with stuff that's in this vault in the sky. But it could be that there's other stuff out there if I were to use that setting in a way that gradually developed through the ages. That's a possibility. And I also then like the idea, which I think I put down here, where rather than having dimensions between portals between dimensions and having different planes, you actually just have different planets, and the portals take you between planets. That would be an interesting idea to explore, but I think that's a little bit too sci-fi for what I'm wanting. So it's a nice, yeah. Mike and Kitten are both playing and streaming Grim Dawn, but they promised me that they would lurk, which they're doing, which is very nice of them. So yeah, that's possibly a little too sci-fi. So what I might do is just go, if we make it the classic geocentric world, you have a heavenly vault, as it were, and there are stars and satellites, stars and moons and things that orbit around, and the sun orbits around, but it's not actually a heavenly body that you could go to. The world is still a sphere. I think I would make it a sphere, yes. Right, so so if I were to make the world sort of geocentric, I would have the material plane be a sphere, but and the heavenly planes and the hellish planes are different planes of existence. You want to fall off? Well, then make your own. It's very difficult, because if you go with a flat Earth or a flat material plane, yeah, you can make the heavens above and the hell below, and that's quite straightforward. If you make it a sphere, you're then starting to look into a planetary system, which then you're looking more into a sci-fi or a reality version of things. It's difficult. I want something that's halfway between. I mean, the interesting thing is, if you go back to Middle Earth, it is both, which is super weird. It is both flat and a sphere. Yeah, I mean, we're all inspired by a number of different things. A lot of my inspiration comes from Tolkien. Some of the ideas that I've had have come from me watching The Witcher. you're never going to get a situation where you invent something completely originally. So each one of my worlds has inspiration. I mean, my main novel world, this sci-fi thing, is heavily inspired by the Wing Commander series, computer game series. And the reason for that is it came about because I was playing those games and I invented a story for my character that weaved through those games. I then took that story and went, okay, I'm going to create my own original world around that. So there's lots of similarities because that's where it originally came from. But in the end, what I come up with, while influenced by that, is actually original. Same with my letters story. It's inspired by a combination of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, the Prince of Persia film, A Knight's Tale, the film, Helen of Troy, that story, aspect of the film The Last Samurai. All those things meld together to, in my head, to come up with this little world that is inspired by all those things. And my Spy Master series, it's heavily inspired by the works of John le Carré, so Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But also the film, which I can't remember what it's called now. Enemy of the State, with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. It's inspired by that as well. So each one of my stories has its own influences. And it's okay to draw on those influences. Some of them will have good ideas. And there's also things that you'll come up with completely on your own that you'll later discover that somebody else has already come up with. I came up with this fantastic idea for a personal shield system for my sci-fi world. Hello, Fliss. Welcome. Hello, Bilbo. Thank you for the sub. Yeah, I came up with this personal shield system for my sci-fi novel, which is based on a sort of non-Newtonian idea, whereby it would stop bullets, but not something travelling slower, like a sword. So it would allow people to be protected against weapon fire, shooting things, guns, and so we'd have to fight with swords. And I thought, this is a great original idea. And I told somebody about it, one of my friends, and he said, oh, like in June. I went, what? I'd not really heard of June at that point. I'd never read it. And lo and behold, there's exactly the same idea in there. And yet I came up with it completely originally, on my own, based on my knowledge of things, and just so happens that somebody else 60 odd years ago had the same idea. I'm actually very hairy. Yes. I'm glad that... Well, I'm assuming you like the beard. This is going to become my Santa beard. It's going to... or Viking beard, depending on your perspective. It was lost to a good cause. And in fact, I still have the remnants of it. Well, I figured, why not? It's not useful for anything. And it's too short to give to charity. So I just kept it. Well, there you go. So for your benefit, Fliss, we are doing some world building for my D&D world, and we're getting distracted frequently and often, and conversations on other things. So we spent a very long time talking about Tolkien and Middle-earth and that world. We've talked about my other worlds that I'm working on. We talked a lot about D&D and stuff. Yes, stuff and things and stuff. And yeah, so we are coming up with ideas for my world. Its origins being I have a character called Archimedes as a sword mage in a D&D setting. Those little emotes that you have are actually Archimedes. And that's where the idea for the beard, and that's where the original beard was from. It's an Archimedes beard. And I wrote some stories. I wrote some stories, some short stories about Archimedes for a D&D short story anthology, and started developing a world, and we're now looking holistically at this whole world and going, okay, if I'm developing it as a world that I could eventually turn into, say, a campaign setting or something, what do I want to know about it? Let's flesh it out. So we've started with, it has a few stages of development. It starts off as a cosmological primordial soup, because that's a glorious phrase, and that's what I'm going to use. That then splits into a sort of chaotic set of elemental planes, and eventually out of that comes the material plane. Specific when and hows we haven't defined yet. There are 3 stages of life. Yeah, more than just magic. I mean, a little more specifically. I mean, there's also things like, do I want species that exist within the elemental planes that their original battles and things ultimately created the material plane, something like that. That would be an interesting idea to explore, you know? So, and we haven't even discussed my favourite topic of dragons. So, where do dragons come in? Let's ask that as a big question. Where do dragons come in? Right. So we then discussed the sort of 3 stages of species. We start with an elder species. They're inherently magical. They are sort of celestial beings, kind of, and may eventually become the gods of the material plane. Maybe they come in at the same time as the elemental plane, and they are partially responsible for the creation of the material. That's a good point. Let's take caps lock off, that would help. And then once we have the material plane, one of the first species that exists will be the elves. And I imagine that they are the servants to this elder species. And the elves eventually sort of become one of the sort of elder species on the material plane. Elves are really good with magic. They have some kind of inherent link to magic, but they are not as magical as our original elder species. And then we have third stage, which is humans and the rest. And these, they're not inherently magical. We won't get into fey creatures yet. That's going to be an entertaining side topic. They're not inherently magical, but they can learn magic. And some of the early humans probably learned magic from the elves. So that's what we've discussed so far. We're now discussing what does the material plane look like? Is it a planetary system? Is it like the modern universe? And actually, eventually, when the species develop to a point that they become technologically advanced and sort of space age-ish, then maybe they discover space. But that then becomes sort of very sci-fi. And you then sort of ask yourself, okay, where does the astral plane come into this? The other way of looking at it is just a geocentric system where you either have a sphere or a flat Earth type, and you've got a heavenly vault around it that's not actually penetrable. I think as much as I like the idea of multiple planets and things, particularly when you have magical elements relating to conjunctions and things. That's kind of cool. A bit cliche, but kind of cool. Then I might just stick with a geocentric. So probably go geocentric. Prefer the idea. Spherical planet with a heavenly vault around it. And then we can have the sort of idea of the sort of hellish planes existing either within the sphere or in a dimension that's sort of imagined to be within the sphere. I mean, essentially there'll be different planes. Inhabitants will probably... What is in the sphere? Well, I'd imagine that most inhabitants will imagine that the hellish planes are downwards. So if they were aware that the planet is a sphere, it would be within the sphere. But ultimately, I would consider it to be a separate plane of existence. Is flat plane and with heavens above and hells below. Do you want a moon? I mean, this would then prove an interesting question. If there were no moon, how would a calendar be split up? Because a modern calendar, well, I say modern, even old calendars on the Earth were based on the lunar cycle. It's a month. So, if there were no moon, how would the year be split up? It's a very interesting idea. Seasons. I mean, I like the idea of moon. So, is at least 1 million. You need, yes. So you have a year. And you'll have seasons. I mean, that's another interesting thing. Seasons are seasons are defined by the fact that the planet is tilted on its axis. If the planet were completely vertical, there would be no seasons. So actually, to have seasons, you must have a tilt. To have correct, there are no seasons on the Earth equator. So with, for instance, clever flooding of the Nile in Egypt, they can have 3 harvests a year. Which is quite clever. So yes, if there were no tilt, so seasons require a tilt to the planet. Months require a moon. Hello! Worldbuilding, yes. Days is planet rotation, months and moon. I'm feeling terrible, really terrible, because I can't remember your name. How many times a day do I see it on Twitter? I can't remember. Yes, clearly. Katerina. Anyway, hello. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, I do not have a brain for names. I'm sorry. Almost to prove the point, when I was at university, I arranged to live with a guy in my second year. And I'd known him for a whole year. And we had this conversation, hey, let's live together next year, share a house. And then immediately afterwards I went to him, you know, I can't remember your name. So there you go. Yeah. Anyway, welcome. I'll give the brief summary again. So we are... I have a character named Archimedes. Exists in D&D context. I originally wrote some short stories and we are now fleshing out the world around in which those short stories exist. We're looking at it from a very broad cosmological scale at the moment. So we started out going, okay, what's the sequence of events that gets us a material plane? So we start off primordial soup, going to elemental planes, and then out of that we get a material plane. How, other than magic, as Essa so rightly pointed out earlier, not explained yet. I think by the end of this stream, Essa's going to get very bored of the number of times I've gone through this summary. But there we go. We got 3 stages of species. So we start off with an elder species, which is sort of celestial based. Or as he goes to bed, that also works. So these celestial creatures probably came about at the same time that the elemental planes developed. They are inherently magical and probably eventually become the gods, the material plane. We then have the second stage, which is the elves. They are the first of the humanoid species that exists on the material plane. They're originally sort of servants to this elder species. They are also inherently magical, but not as inherently magical. And then the third stage is humans and the rest. And they are not magical, but they can learn magic. Ignoring fey creatures for now. Fey is its own thing, which will be entertaining to look at. So that's what we come up with so far. We've discussed, okay, what's the planetary system? What does the material plane look like? Is it geocentric, i.e. everything revolves around the planet? Is it heliocentric, so it revolves around the sun? Is it a planetary system? Is it like a modern universe, but people exist on the planet in a sort of medieval time? Or are we going to take a medieval look at it and go, well, the material plane is a single planet with a sort of heavenly vault around it, which is kind of the view that I want to take. Otherwise you start introducing science fiction into your fantasy, which could be fun, but not if we're going to leave it with a D&D setting for now. So there was this idea that I came up with was, well, if you've got multiple planets, perhaps jumping between planes and dimensions, actually just jumping between planets. It's kind of cool. But and then we could have something like a hellish planet is actually a planet that's nearer the sun, kind of cool, bit too sci-fi. So I think what I will probably go is the old traditional geocentric idea. I will go with a sphere, but so you can actually go all the way around. And then you have this sort of heavenly vault, so once you get to the edge of the atmosphere, that's as far as you can go. And then you have other planes that create the sort of celestial planes and the hellish planes. Of course, the majority of the inhabitants will probably think of it as a flat Earth type thing. It's an onion. I mean, if you want to think of it as an onion, you can think of it as an onion. And we're now thinking moons. And I mean, we were just discussing the concepts that exist within the calendar actually dependent on the fact that you're in a heliocentric planetary system, because you've got days that are the rotation of the planet. You've got seasons that are dependent on the tilt of the planet. You've got months that are dependent on the orbit of the moon. A year is dependent on the orbit of around the sun, solar orbit. So by going with the geocentric model, we're magicking that way. But probably best not to think too much about it. How many moons? Yes, there will be at least one moon. I'm intrigued by the idea of that moon having its own moon. Because a lot of fantasy scenarios would have the planet and the moon going around the planet, and then a second moon which is further out going around the planet. Is it possible for a moon to have a moon? Yes, it is. For the same reason that it's possible for us to put satellites around the moon. And for the same reason it's possible for the Earth to orbit the Sun and have a moon of its own. So, yes, it's possible. Can I be bothered to work out the maths of it? Good question. If you poke me sufficiently, I will at some point go and work out the maths. But yes, I like the maths of an in-place system. How it came to be? How it came to be is actually quite simple. Or how it can come to be in a modern scientific world is actually quite simple. All you need to do is actually split off or have a collision with the moon, but with not sufficient momentum that the two bodies just remain captured. And therefore rotate. We've also got the problem that the moon is tightly locked with the Earth, so there wouldn't be much of a spin, but that's something that happens after a long period of time. Originally it would have had a spin. It's an interesting thought experiment, probably not related. Anyway, there is at least one moon. There is a moon which has its own little moon that orbits around it. Tell me if I can type. Okay, Katerina. Thank you for coming along. I I ought to take a break in a moment because I've been talking a lot. And given that Essa's going to bed now will be a perfect opportunity to take a break. Yeah, so I will do that. I will be back in 10-15 minutes, and then we will carry on. And we will talk about some more specifics. Thank you, Essa, for going along, and good night to you and everybody else. I will be back shortly. Hello everybody, welcome back. So, a couple of thoughts whilst I was going to collect my tea. So, the first idea of the moon, a lot of mythological stories personify heavenly bodies. So I thought, well, if we've got a moon with a little moon orbiting around it, perhaps it's a mother with her child locked in a perpetual dancing twirl across the sky. A perpetual Viennese waltz. So I like that. Perpetual whirling dance across the sky. So that was one of the ideas, and the next idea was answering the question of where do the dragons come in? And it was, I like this idea of some of the first conflict being between the elders. It's the first big great battle. And I thought, well, what is the entity of these elders? And I thought, what if the dragon, part of the elders are the dragons? And perhaps that's one of the first big battles. So we've got this sort of big primordial existence. From that develops these elder entities. Perhaps they then split into various groups. So you have the various dragon groups, metallics, gems, chromatics. And then you've got these three sort of celestial groups. The middle one I've not perfected yet, but you have the celestials, you have the fiends, and then you have some kind of material plane elder. Maybe that's where the Fae come from. And so that would be interesting. And so the first big sort of conflict is the idea of, well, firstly you have good versus evil. But on top of that you have the whole, are we creators? Or do we want a closer interaction with our creation? Are we divine beings, or do we want a closer interaction? So I think let's start putting this down. Elders. So they were originally one consistent fundamental group. Is it fundamental? I think it's fundamental. Right? So originally one consistent fundamental group. And then this splits in two. First group being deities, sort of, and the second group being more material. Right, so the deities being those who wants to influence from a distance, and the material being those who want more direct interaction. And then I reckon this group, the materials, the dragons. First group become deities, both good and evil. Whether we go for good and evil deities, don't know. Materials, they become dragons. Now, you also have a sort of primordial elemental versus celestial split. So I'm wondering whether we want to end up with a group from the sort of a neutral group from the deities. From the celestial. Let's call that celestial rather less. Yeah. I think we need to call it celestial and primordial. Right? So the celestial, those you want to influence from distance, they become sort of deities of a sort. The primordial, they're more elemental, more primordial, and they become sort of more dragons. Do we want a neutral celestial group? I don't know. These groups then among cells and split further. So, celestial group splits to deities and fiend. This is a problem in D&D lore. If you have deities that don't necessarily have an alignment, the demons and fiends become... they're not celestial beings. Put a question mark over that. And then the primordial splits to tonic, gem, dragons, and those are then our elder species. I think this probably splits further to those with more primordial tendency. Brackets. Versus those with more material tendency. So that then becomes an interesting possibility. So rather than just splitting into good versus evil, you've got those that favour a more primordial existence, more elemental existence, versus those who have more of a material tendency, so material plane tendency. And it's the old chaotic nature being versus the sort of urban being, if you like. So you get this matching in elves and their forest versus humans and their civilizations. So rural versus civilization. So primordial versus material. But yeah. So who knew it? Our elders were dragons. That's kind of cool. So first major conflict. So a lot of drama and story narrative comes from conflict. Conflict is the default state of the world. Peace is only obtained through active determination. So by default, the world should be in conflict. Conflict comes from a number of sources, but in this first instance, the elders are created as the elementals. So let's start. The elders are created as the elemental planes form out of the primordial chaos. So that's the first point. Then you have conflict arises from those who wish to form a more, want a better word, civilized society. It's in US. How dare it? Why is the language of my browser in US? No. No. Okay. Solved. Right. To form conflict arises from those who wish to form a more civilized society versus those who prefer the mental chaos. So that's the first big conflict, and that results in celestial orders versus primordial orders. That's your first big conflict. The Celestials win and form the material plane of the chaos, the center, the elemental planes. Win is in speech marks there because it's not necessarily winning, it's just split. There's probably continual conflict and it ends up being achieving an equilibrium. But let's clarify this. Not when as such, but achieve a new equilibrium where now and a material plane exists. The Celestials, the caretakers, the new material plane, the prime feels wants nothing to do. So the Celestials, having created this material plane, then almost take themselves out of that conflict. They become firmly focused in maintaining this material plane and almost create a barrier between the planes. And that's the end of the first major conflict. So you start off with 4-ish. You start off with a primordial chaos, out of which you start to get the first elements of the elemental planes, which are a sort of combined mass rather than separate planes. And along with those you get the elders as consciousnesses start to form. You then have the sort of order versus chaos conflict of those who wish to remain and develop this elemental chaos, versus those who want a more constructed material plane. And this splits into the Celestials who want this constructed material plane versus the Primordials who want to maintain this elemental chaos. And the Celestials succeed in building out this material plane from the center of this elemental chaos. And they then form a barrier between the two. Thin barrier. There are going to, as we'll get on later, there'll be gaps in that where some of the other planes sort of leak through. But there's this elemental barrier that says, okay, this is now the material plane. Not elemental barrier. There is a barrier. This is now, okay, there's this material plane, and it's distinct from the elemental chaos, and it sort of solidifies to a point that it's now more difficult to affect. And the Celestials then go, okay, this is now our area, we're going to focus our effort on this material plane, and you Primordials can have your stuff. Yeah, this will then lead to the second major conflict. Celestials. And this, I'm probably not going to build up too much in this stream, but it will come down to how to build out the material plane. I don't imagine a massive conflict between deities, but what I do imagine is that it will gradually define the deity portfolios and the celestial and hellish things. So, that's probably not going to be a conflict as such. But it will be a case of, right, these deities will start to define their own portfolios. There might be conflict. I'd imagine the fallout, some of the conflict results in the heavenly bodies, e.g. the sun, the moon, former celestial. So some of the celestials give their essence to build a reaction in the material plane. Such as so when the moon is created, it's no longer that essence is no longer a celestial as such. But for instance, the moon mother and child thing, they left the celestial group and went dancing across the sky, and are now no longer deities, as it were. So while in myths and legends, the species on the material plane would consider the moon a deity, what actually happens is that there is a celestial deity responsible for the moon. Perhaps the father figure, the deity, figures this is so you've got a deity within the pantheon that is responsible for these sort of heavenly bodies and has some kind of relationship with the celestials that gave up their essence to become those bodies. See. Responsible Something like that. I kind of like. Now, whether those heavenly bodies are the result of conflict, could be. One present day example being our current constellations. So Orion the Hunter. Ended up in the sky in a perpetual hunt. I don't know, I can't remember who was chasing. Scorpio? Something like that. So it's that sort of idea. And then we have the third major conflict. Primordial. Primordials. Right? So the material plane now exists. There are those among the primordials who want to pull it back into the mental chaos. And these become the dramatics. There are those who like where things are going. Want to influence but basically lost the opportunity to become a celestial. And so these actually end up being some of the first beings on the material plane. You know what? I have no idea how loud my typing is. I'm now concerned that I will probably go back and watch this later and all my speaking will be completely drowned out by typing. There you go. That's life. So these actually end up being some of the first beings on the material plane, and strive to grant wisdom. And these become the Talics. I ought to capitalize these. Dramatics. Italics. Last group being main. Neutral. Oops. Need to learn more about these be my rich backing. In which case I probably ought to capitalize that as well. So where do the elves come from? That's my next big question. Various ideas. Celestials. Angelic servants. Celestials. For sake. Divinity. From elves. or the talking thing of as to have the on the material plane humanoid species. Being allowed turn to the place on the line thing. Talking. Some define to turn the way I think that's probably all I've got for now. It's a lot of stuff we covered today. Had not occurred to me before this session that the elders would be dragons. And now that I think of it, it makes perfect sense. So what do I need to work on next? Well, probably some of the myths. I need to work on what this second major conflict was the starting to build out of the material plane. And probably so flesh out some of the stories of the land masses and how they came to be. So to do next, start the stages, the material. How the major continents cultures were formed, that they are start to outline the major eras. Now, one thing that we want to focus on is, in order for this world to have a sense of history to it, in the modern day, it needs to have a number of eras. So, because if you start your D&D setting from, well, the world came into being and here you are, that's not very interesting because there's no history. There's nothing to discover. There's no previous civilizations that rose and fell. So I think this was one of the issues. It's not really an issue. It's one of the things that I noted with Critical Role was that your current era, while being 800 years away from the calamity, that was basically the only major historical event in that world. The history of it is a bit shallow. And I suppose you could say that about Lord of the Rings as well, because Lord of the Rings takes place in quite an early era of Middle-earth. But the difference with Lord of the Rings is that it's about, well, firstly, a lot of that history is there, but and Tolkien put a lot of effort to put in different cultures, different groups. So a lot of that history is there. And yes, it's quite shallow, I suppose. But also because it's a novel, you're just telling the story linearly. You're not putting in plot hooks for players to go and find. And I think if you've got players that are trying to investigate things, having multiple layers makes it a lot more interesting. So I think that's what we want to try and do. And of course, this is going to be made more interesting by the fact that there's more magic in the past than the present. Because the predecessors were more inherently magical, there's potential scope for more advanced civilization earlier on. And that gets wiped out somehow. And of course, some of the interesting things is going, well, how did previous civilizations get wiped out? If they were so advanced, why aren't they here now? That's an interesting question. So, fall and splitting of an empire. An empire gets hang on. So, if an empire can get too big and it expands beyond the ability of its resources, there's a lot of strain then maintaining that, and it sort of self-destructs from the inside. And then you get lords and things that are up and coming, and they will go, actually, I can take advantage of this. I have the power and the influence here to create my own little kingdom. And that's what they do. And gradually the empire will fall apart. You'll have someone else who develops the power and the resources to go, actually, okay, I've got my own little kingdom, I can take my surrounding kingdoms and then build a new empire. Or you could have diplomatic empires and that sort of. All sorts of political stuff that can cause a civilization to collapse. So that's something worth exploring. Maybe I want an evolving political map of my material plane that shows some of these effects. And I want an overlap of different cultures developing. I want a diverse material plane. And so develop different cultures that interact and see how that historical influence is historical political influence has changed with those cultural changes, and what happens if you have a culture that develops in isolation and what things feed that. There's a lot of work that I can do that will develop that in a very cool way. So, but that will be it for now. I think I'm going to sign off there, and I will send you on to probably onto Kitten rather than Mike. Although Mike has fewer viewers. Not that I've got many people actively watching here. We'll go and raid Kitten, I think. Anyway, folks, tomorrow we will be back here at 7 PM. Mike and I will be doing some Guild Wars 2. I know we're normally doing Sea of Thieves over the weekend, but there's some Guild Wars 2 stuff that we want to work on to get ourselves ready for the new expansion that's coming out in February. So that's what we're going to work on. Yeah. So I'll see you then. In the meantime, thank you for coming along. I hope that was interesting. I'm going to do a lot more of these, hopefully every Friday. Some will be more of what you've had today. Others will be sort of homebrewing some monsters and stuff. Because I've got my own experiments on monster homebrew in D&D. Some of it will be sometime later on, will be some other worlds, I think. But yeah, I hope that was enjoyable. And I'll see you all next time.